Welcome to the first ever edition of the Fieldhouse podcast. I am going to be your host, Sam Vicini. Today on the show, we are going to reintroduce people to college basketball. We understand that we're going to get a whole lot more fans trying to peek their heads into the game after the Super Bowl. So our goal here is to let you understand what has happened throughout the first few months of the year. And to do that, we're going to have two guests. Our second guest is going to be CL Brown. We're going to talk about some of the blue bloods of college basketball, your Kentuckys, your Dukes, your Louisvilles, UNCs, Kansases. But at the top, I have brought on our fearless leader, our editor-in-chief, Seth Davis, to talk about some of the best teams and some of the biggest storylines within college basketball throughout the course of the first 3 months of the year. Seth, how's it going, man?
It's going all right, man. Busy time of year, but it beats working. So this is glad we finally got this podcast going because it's another work responsibility that I need to own up to. So I'm psyched.
I'm excited to be doing this too. We're going to do this every Sunday with Seth to kind of go over what happened over the course of the big weekend in college basketball. But before we get into all that action, which we'll talk about later this week, obviously, I want to just ask Seth this simple question. What are the biggest storylines in college basketball so far? We're going to exclude the Michigan State scandal because we're going to talk about that later in the week. But on the floor in college basketball this season, what are the biggest storylines that you have felt have deservedly gotten the most press?
Well, I would say it's what I'm writing for my Hoop Thoughts column this week, Sam, which is that we have three teams that have separated themselves from the pack and done so in a way that used to be conventional, that is, I think, now considered rather unconventional in Villanova, Virginia, and Purdue. Virginia was not even ranked in the preseason, and right now they're the number one overall seed, clearly, if the tournament were to be selected and seeded today. And these are three programs that have done it through culture. And this is not to disparage anyone else's culture. This is not to disparage, the one and done route. I talked to all three head coaches about this. Any of them would have taken, a Marvin Bagley, DeAndre Ayton, RJ Barrett. I mean, they'll take those guys, but they're a little bit more selective in terms of who they have to go after, because they can't just pick the best players that are out there. And then, Sam, they've done it in a way where you're developing players over time. I mean, Mikal Bridges is a great example at Villanova. He came into school, he weighed 165 pounds, and they redshirted him. So he had to patiently wait for his redshirt season, and then he had to patiently wait as he played behind other guys, meanwhile improving and being a part of that culture. Jalen Brunson, you can make a case for him right now as National Player of the Year, at least in the non-Trae Young division. He wasn't even on the court for that Chris Jenkins three-pointer a couple years ago. And so we do see a lot of roster turnover these days. Not only players transferring out, but those programs have not taken in many transfers. It means suffering through some lean years, and Purdue has gone through that. And then the fans start chirping, the media starts chirping. But look where we are. They're the three best teams in the country that play a great style of basketball, and I think only one of them on your big board, Bridges, might be the only first-round pick on those three teams. Is there anybody else besides Mikal Bridges in your first round?
Yeah, right now, Mikal Bridges is the only guy I have in the top 10, certainly. In terms of the first round, I have Jalen Brunson right on that borderline. I have him at number 33. For Purdue, Vince Edwards is going to be the highest guy. I have him in the 40s, maybe like the 50s. Dakota Mathias is on my board at least. Not really a big Isaac Haas guy for the NBA. Virginia has a lot of younger guys, a lot of players who will continue to develop over the course of the next few years, which is terrifying for the rest of college basketball, I think. Maybe their best prospect is DeAndre Hunter, I think, long term. But you're right, these are not three teams that have an abundance of NBA prospects. Jay Wright, Tony Bennett, Matt Painter, they've built these teams. I guess the way to put it is in their own image and what they want. They want guys who play hard on both ends of the floor, who can defend, who are switchable, who are, long and athletic, and in Purdue's case, bruising and powerful in the post in Isaac Haas. So I really like what all three of these coaches have done this year in terms of building their rosters out.
Yeah, and you mentioned DeAndre Hunter. That's another guy who redshirted. Now he had a high ankle sprain, and Tony Bennett told me that he probably could have played last year, could have helped them last year, but he delegated to the kid to make that decision. So, and then when you have that buy-in that year-to-year buy-in. And again, I want to reemphasize, I'm not disparaging how anyone else is doing it, but just as an example, I did Purdue's game this week against Maryland at home for a Big Ten Network. I'm going to be there again for Ohio State this week. And Vince Edwards has been, like everybody else, including you and me, has been very sick. And before that game, he was literally throwing up in the bathroom. They didn't even know if he was going to be able to play. And so you could tell in the way that he shot the ball 3 for 10. But you know what? He had 11 rebounds in that game, including 5 offensive rebounds. And I want to say 5 assists and a turnover. And then, I interviewed him on air after the game and said, how'd you do it? And he's like, it just got to power through and don't want to let my teammates down. And, I mean, when you've been there for 4 years in the trenches with these guys, checked out the NBA draft last year, came back, these guys are very invested. So when things go against you, you're more likely to stay connected and stick together. That's what I mean by culture.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think the culture is incredibly important. I wonder if there's also lessons to learn in terms of roster building from these 3 teams, right? All 3 of these teams have very switchable guys on the wing, right? Like Ty Jerome is 6'5", DeAndre Hunter 6'7", Devin Hall 6'5", Isaiah Wilkins 6'7", all pretty solid defensively, and maybe Ty Jerome not so much, but switchable, and he can guard a lot of guys. Mikal Bridges, Dante DiVincenzo, Eric Paschall, Phil Booth, all those guys are switchable for Villanova. In Purdue's case, you mentioned Vince Edwards, but they also have Dakota Mathias, and Nogel Eastern is another guy like that. They're all very switchable in terms of the way they defend. They're all very wing-oriented teams, as well as having good guards and good big men. But I think the wings separate these teams in the way that they match up with their opposition.
Well, I think we're both probably seeing a lot of that in college hoops, right? I mean, you have to have versatility. I mean, it's positionless basketball. I mean, you mentioned Isaac Haas. I was talking to Matt Painter before the game last week, and I said, it's like, what do you do? Everyone's putting him in ball screens. He's like, everybody puts him in ball screens. They've been doing it for 4 years. You work with it the best you can, and you teach him how to do it. But the number, because he's never going to play zone, we know that.
Right.
Literally, I don't think they've played a single possession zone all year. He said, but the main thing you got to do is hurt them at the other end.
Yep.
But for most teams, you have to be versatile. But it really, again, to me, when you talk about culture, there has to be continuity along with that culture. And I've had this conversation, with John Calipari when I did that story on him for the Fieldhouse a couple of months ago about, why don't you recruit guys who are going to stick around? And in his view, they become less talented, but sometimes you got to be able to project a little bit. And do they have a willingness to sit for a year or two, or take a red shirt, develop, play behind guys? Because the bar becomes so high when you're reloading that one and done culture every single year, having to turn over your roster. If you're not getting the best of the best, it's hard to compete. And then even when you do get the best of the best, as Krzyzewski's learning this year, it's very hard to teach them how to play. I mean, everybody can be bought and play hard and want to win, and it doesn't make them bad human beings. They just don't know. I mean, these guys at Duke, they don't know how to play good man-to-man defense. It's very, very hard. It takes years to develop that. So these guys have had to do it by necessity. North Carolina last year had to do it a little bit by necessity because their recruiting got hurt because of the NCAA case. So I don't know if this is going to cause anybody to rethink the way that they recruit, but I'll bet that most fans think the way to go is to try to get as many one-and-dones as you can and take transfers and all that. And these 3 teams are proving otherwise.
Well, it's so interesting in Kentucky's case, too, right? Because as you mentioned, I think you brought up a great point. You have to get the best guys year in, year out. Kentucky, I mean, their best player, their best recruit as well as player is probably Kevin Knox. He was like a top 10 guy. I think that we can certainly figure that he will be a top 15 pick in the NBA draft. But beyond that, I mean, they didn't really get a ton of other crazy high recruits, and it looks like a lot of those guys are probably going to have to return to college next season, and that could be a blessing in disguise for John Calipari. I mean, it's just going to be interesting to see the way that these teams kind of go about building going forward.
That's actually a very interesting question. Is how many of you think they need to come back to school, but you think those kids are thinking let's count who's gone. Kevin Knox is gone, right?
I think so.
Hamidou Diallo is probably gone.
Probably.
PJ Washington.
I don't think PJ should go. I don't think.
That's not what I'm asking. That's not what I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't get into this game because I don't know the kids enough.
It's and neither do I, and that's why. I mean, sometimes it's a slant. Like Jared Vanderbilt, I guarantee you, he thinks he's gone. So I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it's and by the way, by any standards, Kentucky had an outstanding recruiting class. I mean, this is by any standards. But when now they all have to play and they all have to play right away, and they're the youngest team in the Ken Pom era. It's hard to beat good teams. I mean, they were lucky to beat Vanderbilt at home in overtime. So,
Yeah.
To answer my own question, I respectfully will disagree with John Calipari. I think if you're building a program, you need to find players who will help you develop that culture where you don't have to play 5 freshmen. You can play 3 freshmen or 4 freshmen, but have a culture where you have players coaching players. And to me, it's just a better way to go. But who am I to argue with John Calipari, Mike Krzyzewski, and Bill Self?
No, I think it's an interesting point in terms of the theory of college basketball, though, right? Like, these guys aren't necessarily experts. This is something that's a totally new system, right? This is a totally new scheme. They're still adjusting in much the same way the college basketball world, I think, is, right?
Well, and then the transferring thing, too, because, I mean, Duke, they just lose this kid, Jordan Tucker.
Exactly.
He doesn't even stick around for a freaking year. Right? Like, what is Jordan Tucker expecting is going to happen when he goes to Duke? Right? And then does he expect A, he's going to beat out the guys that came in with him, and B, does he expect that Mike Krzyzewski's not going to recruit the best players the next year? So he stays till December. So that's why he's only playing 5 guys or 6 guys. He doesn't have anyone else good enough to play. It's a conundrum.
Tucker is a tough one for me because you look at what Duke is right now, and the fact that he couldn't get on the floor is kind of shocking to me, right? Just given the fact that they're playing 7 guys a night realistically. Like, he's a guy whose skill set would probably fit well with what they need, but if he can't get on the floor now, when is he going to get on the floor in the future? So I understand him transferring. It's just crazy that it got to that point,
Well, but if he was still on the team, he might be on them. I'm sure
that's true.
Krzyzewski would have loved to have put him in Saturday against St. John's.
That's a great point.
And Krzyzewski has a bad habit, I'll be honest, with shortening his bench anyway. Like, he's so it's not easy. That's why they get paid well.
No doubt. Let's go on ahead and do just a rapid fire thing before I let you go and move on to CL. We're going to do a 5-4-3-2-1 system here. There's not a whole lot of explanation necessary once you see what the deal is going to be. I'm going to ask you to name the 5 All-Americans in the country right now.
So I've got 3 are easy, right? Trae Young, Jalen Brunson, Marvin Bagley.
Agree.
I've got Jock Landale would be my in the 4 hole.
Okay.
I've been on Devontae Graham. Not quite ready to go there yet. I'm leaning towards Miles Bridges, the most polarizing player in America now.
Crazy.
It's unbelievable to me that anybody, apparently he doesn't have game, whatever game means.
What a ridiculous statement.
You could convince me to go DeAndre Ayton at the 5th one. But right now I'll put Miles Bridges in there.
So I agree with your top 3. I would throw DeAndre Ayton in there at number 4. He's doing things that statistically have not been done since Tim Duncan, if you look at the numbers. And then I would go with the Big Ten Player of the Year right now, in my opinion, in Keita Bates-Diop from Ohio State. He has been absolutely unbelievable for them, and I think he's the big reason why this Ohio State team is battling for the top of the Big Ten whenever no one expected that coming into the year. So 4. Who are your 4 biggest surprise breakout players in college basketball this year?
I wish I prepared better for you. Can you give me some candidates? Well, I'll go Svi Mikhailuk.
I like that.
Well, first of all, number 1 is definitely Bates-Diop. Like, there's no question that he's the top of the list. Svi Mikhailuk is a guy who certainly showed flashes in the past of being able to do that, and to see him put it together like that is I'm really happy for him. I know it's been a little bit of a struggle for him. Got to go with Luke May, certainly. At North Carolina, he comes into mind. And then I don't know that I'd call him a breakout, but I just want to throw him some love because he's having such an unbelievable year. Nobody's talking about him, I think, and that's Marcus Foster at Creighton. He's been good all along, so probably doesn't fit the breakout, but I want to know that we got Marcus Foster in this podcast.
I would have gone with Keenan Evans, Texas Tech. He's been unbelievable. The main reason why Texas Tech is sitting at 19-4 right now. I'd have thrown Keita Bates-Diop.
Could make a case for him first team All-America, by the way.
Yeah, you really can. I would probably go Keita Bates-Diop. I would throw Jalen Hudson in there from Florida, transfer kid. Was kind of not sure what to expect from him because you were getting some stories that, Mike White didn't like the way he defended, so he wasn't sure he was going to get on the floor. He's been absolutely incredible as well, and you have to go Luke May, right? Luke May has just been absolutely incredible this year. He's now North Carolina's best player, and if you would have said that Luke May was going to be North Carolina's best player, you probably would have gotten laughed at coming into the year. So, 3. Who are your 3 biggest NCAA tournament sleeper teams? Well,
I don't know if St. Mary's qualifies as a sleeper. Sure. I know they're a top 25 team, but again, this is not a great Gonzaga team, but the fact that they were able to go in there and win like that, and it's always interesting to me that a team is so efficient on offense, yet they play such a slow tempo. Usually you don't see that combination. I think it's pretty effective because it makes them that much harder to guard. So they come into mind. I love Nevada. I love them. I watch their games anytime I can. They just play together. They're so well connected. And they're old. They don't have any kind of traditional big. And then, we'll see how it develops, but I'm very impressed with what I've seen from Texas over the last couple of weeks. They're starting to make shots. It's just the emotional trauma alone of losing Andrew Jones to leukemia was bad enough. But he was their only good outside shooter, and now you see Matt Coleman and Kerwin Roach really stepping up and making shots, and you've got a beast of a rim protector. So I'm definitely warming up on them.
I am going to give you Cincinnati. They're obviously a top 10 team in the country, but I think we're not talking about them enough as a Final Four contender. They are an absolutely incredible defense, and their offense is a little bit better than what I think they get credit for. I'm going to throw you Clemson as well. I know another top 25 team, but this is a senior, junior, experience-laden team that really gets after it defensively. 13th in adjusted defensive efficiency, according to Ken Palm. My last team, I'm going to give you a way under the radar team that I think can make a nice second weekend run. I'm going to go Louisiana Lafayette. They have won 17 of their last 18 games. They have a lot of high major kids too. Jakeenan Gant, Marcus Stroman, Malik Marquetti, Frank Bartley was over at BYU for the first couple years of his career. This is a really good team that I think can get after it.
Okay. I think it's technically Louisiana now, right? Isn't that what they're going on?
It is, they've rebranded.
Yeah, that's all. That's a good one. I'll keep my eye on them. I appreciate the tip.
2, who are your 2 best National Coach of the Year candidates? And limiting it to 2, I know, is tough.
I'll give you Tony Bennett and Chris Holtmann.
I can dig that. Chris Holtmann's done a great job. Do you want to explain Bennett real quick? Because, obviously number 2 in the country, but I kind of want to put into context how incredible the job he's done is this year.
Well, the players that he loses from year to year, and, losing a guy like London Perrantes and then losing a couple of transfers in the offseason, starting off the season not even ranked in the top 25 to number 1 overall seed in the tournament. I don't think there have been too many. That would be a good thing to look up. Like, has any team gone from unranked in the preseason to number 1 overall in the tournament? Would you say that's ever happened? I'll bet that's never happened.
I would bet that's never happened. I will say, it was pretty bizarre that this Virginia team was not ranked in the preseason. They have Kyle Guy, who was a McDonald's All-American, Ty Jerome, who was a top 50 kid, DeAndre Hunter was a top 100 kid, Isaiah Wilkins, Mamadi Diakite. They have a lot of good players and recruits on this team, right? It feels like people just forgot about them. Well,
perhaps. Who knew? Who knew? And then, by the way, the thing about Holtmann is just the circumstances that he took the job, coming in June when you certainly can't add any. The guy his big addition after June was Andrew Dockich, who was getting ready to be at a grad transfer to Quinnipiac, and there was some mix-up. I think they found a mix-up, frankly, academically, to get him out of it because he was so desperate when he called his Dan. And you know what Holtmann told me? He said the coaches at Quinnipiac told Andrew Dockich that he was going to play about 10 minutes a game. And he has been huge for that team. He has been huge for that team.
He really has.
But the point being, for Holtmann taking over the job in June is a big reason why he's my pick.
I'm going to give you Bruce Pearl and Matt Painter as my 2 picks. I'm a big fan of both of those guys. And my last one, number 1, who is your 1 national champion prediction coming down the stretch here on February 5th when this podcast is released?
I am actually tempted to pick Michigan State. they're a little bit of a wild card for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is everything going on there. But I'm gonna stick with the obvious choice, which is Villanova. I just feel like they're the whole package. I'm a little concerned about their defense. Jay Wright told me that he thinks that Phil Booth will be back for the league tournament at the latest, so they should be at full strength. And then they just have those two guys in Brunson and Bridges. I'm a big believer in when you get to the tournament, last few minutes, late clock, nothing is working, no play is working. Just do you have a guy who can just go get you one? And they've got two of those. So I'll take my chances with Brunson and Bridges and ride the Wildcats as far as they'll take me.
I'm with you on that. They have the top 1-2 punch in the entire country, in my opinion, in Mikal Bridges and Jalen Brunson. Jay Wright, one of the top 10 coaches in the country, one of the better defensive schemes in the country that I enjoy watching, the way they switch and really attack defensively. Villanova would be my pick, but I agree with you on Michigan State. I really think that they are probably the best blend of talent and experience in the country, and I will never count Tom Izzo out, even under these circumstances at the university. Seth, do you want to preview anything that we've got coming up on the Fieldhouse later this week?
Well, let's keep it a secret. As you well know, things can change. But I hope people will go to theathletic.com and check us out. And I know that people are not used to paying for content. I think right now it's maybe $4 or $5 a month. Keep your eye out for some sales. It can go as low as $3.50. So it's a couple of cups of coffee, and we're working real hard to get you good reporting, good inside access, good writing, and obviously we got the best 2 months of the year are now in front of us. So we're ready to get after it.
Yep, and remember, you get access to all of The Athletic if you subscribe to the Fieldhouse. It's a great product over there, put together by the people that run it. So stay locked here. We'll be back in just about 10 seconds with CL Brown. We're going to talk about the blue bloods of college basketball. All right, we're back now on the podcast with CL Brown, a senior writer over at The Athletic. CL, how's it going, man?
Hey, it's great if I could get over this cold once and for all.
Man, you still sound great, even with the cold. So I don't know what's going on. You just got these feathery, dulcet tones, and we're just out here waiting for you to get over the cold.
Well, I appreciate that. You're far too kind. But.
So as I said at the top here with Seth, we talked about kind of what's happening in general in college basketball. And if you notice, a lot of our discussion centered around the almost non-traditional teams, right? You've got Virginia at the top. You've got Purdue at the top. And Virginia has certainly worked itself into the, blue blood discussion, I think, due to Tony Bennett's presence, but they're not one of the traditional powers. So to talk about those traditional teams, I brought CL on. We're going to talk about Duke, Kentucky, all of the bigger teams. So I guess my first question to you is, why is it you think some of these teams are having some of the issues that they are this season?
Well, I think for the Dukes and Kentuckys of the world, it's a matter of personnel. I mean, they're younger in Kentucky's case than ever before, yeah. and really for Duke, even for Duke, they're starting 4 freshmen, and it's just, I mean, nobody wants to accept it when you're talking about guys that are the elite talents that they sign, but it's still a process where it takes time, and Duke defensively, they're not good, and it doesn't really seem like they're getting any better. It's February now, we've been talking about this. So and Kentucky is kind of the same thing. I think they're in a position where their inconsistencies can be kind of blamed on their youth. So I don't really know going forward if they're going to ever reach the potential that we think both of these teams have.
Yeah, in Duke's case, it's interesting, and I think we should start there. I mean, this is still the number 4 team in the country, I believe, going into the weekend. They'll drop a little bit, but it's hard for me to see them dropping outside of the top 10. This is still an incredibly good basketball team. They're sitting at 19-4, I believe. They have a lot of really strong wins. Michigan State, you can run down the line here. They've beaten Miami. They've beaten Notre Dame, Florida, Texas, as well as starting to peak up as a relatively good win. There is something missing from this team defensively, and you look at their past, right? Like I think that the analog that a lot of people want to make is the 2015 team that won the national title.
Yeah.
That team started to turn around right around mid-January, right? Like everyone remembers the Angel Rodriguez game that happened in mid-January, and they seem to turn it around from there and figure out some of their pick and roll coverage issues and some of the other issues they were having defensively. This year, like you said, we're into February now. We're coming down the stretch of the final third of their season, and it doesn't seem like they're getting better. And in fact, I would say it seems like they're getting worse.
Well, I think part of it is, to me, I think Coach K might just have to go zone all out, just buy all in. I think he used it in 2015 as well on that team, and it seemed like he more sprinkled it then. And he has this year, but and really the zone is what won that game. I mean, will put them in position to win the game against Virginia, because Virginia stopped making shots, and it got them back into a defensive rhythm a bit. But there's no way they're going to be able to cut down the nets without having a stronger presence defensively. I think part of the problem is just they're not good on ball screens. They're not good. And when you go back to the loss to North Carolina State, that's basically Kevin Keatts' system. He loves running ball screens. And so that killed them. And, teams pick up on that. So if you have a guard like yesterday against St. John's, you have somebody like Shamari Pons, they're gonna hurt. And you look at their losses. Boston College has aggressive guards, Jerome Robinson and Kai Bowman. I mean, they're gonna feel it whenever they face a backcourt that kind of has those kind of attacking aggressive guys like that off of ball screens.
Yeah, and you know what the other thing is too that, I noticed throughout that St. John's game, it wasn't just Shamori Pons. Like they would run this right side, side ball screen action to get into the middle, and Duke's youngsters and their perimeter defenders just had no idea on how to do little stuff like tag rollers. And then Marvin Bagley was pretty lost defensively, rotating over from the weak side to help once they got past that second level of defense. I just think that this team is a little bit too young. And then I also think that the coaching staff is putting a lot of pressure in terms of rotations on those players, right? Like they were starting to face guard Shamori Pons away from the basket, and why you're face guarding a 25% 3-point shooter, I'm pretty unclear, but it made it really hard for Trayvon Duvall to try and tag a roller. And it made it really hard for Marvin Bagley to rotate over. I just think that we've seen enough from these guys in terms of what they can do rotationally to where I agree with you. I would be going zone pretty consistently and pretty heavily, especially against teams that love ball screen action. Like they're going to play Virginia Tech coming down the stretch. They're going to play Clemson coming down the stretch. Obviously North Carolina twice with Joel Berry. These teams are going to be athletic enough to get by that first level of attack defensively with guys like, Trayvon Duvall, who is an effective, pesky on-ball guy, but really struggles off the ball. And then Grayson Allen and Gary Trent, who really struggle in both scenarios, in my opinion, both containing and off-ball defense. So I think zone is the way to go. I think I'm with you.
Yeah, it's funny, too. Just looking on paper, it seems like they would have guys who could lock it down. I mean, Duvall and Trent and Allen being kind of your guys on the wing and handling ball, defending ball handlers. It seems like athletically speaking and length speaking, it seems like those guys have the physical tools to be able to do it. But again, I guess we just go back to time, and they haven't had enough repetitions, and they haven't been under Coach K long enough in the system to really, really learn and soak it all up. And he's not going, their bench is, it is what it is at this point. I mean, he's going heavy on the starters. So that's something else I think to keep an eye on, just the fatigue of it. Because to me, when you're being placed in ball screens a lot, at the end of the game is where that fatigue really sets in, because you have to want to fight through it. You have to show a lot of effort to be able to, hedge hard and then get back to your man. And if you're fatigued, especially on a team as gifted offensively, you're thinking, I'm going to save this for the offensive position. So I'm not really going to run back that hard.
Yeah, and these guys just are young and they don't have the experience of being told that, they have to defend. They're all such high-level prospects that, they're coming up through the AAU system, they were all the main guys offensively. This is a new feature for them. This is a new being for them, to where they have to be the role player who can kind of attack defensively and expend energy there. So we'll see what happens with Duke. I think that was a great point in terms of their lack of depth right now causing them issues. Let's talk about Kentucky, though. Kentucky is in an interesting spot, especially after yesterday's loss to Missouri on the road. They have an absolutely awful schedule coming up. They have to play home against Tennessee, road against Texas A&M and Auburn, home against Alabama, on the road at Arkansas over their next 5 games. I mean, if they go 3-2, that's a major, significant win, I think, for them. If they go 2-3, I don't even think they should be really disappointed, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. You look at how Tennessee has been playing. I feel like Texas A&M is starting to come back around. I was high on them at the beginning of the year, and they had their injuries and suspensions and everything, but it seems like they're playing well now. The biggest surprise has been Auburn, the way they've played without D'Angelo Purifoy and Austin Wiley. And coming into SEC play, I thought for sure without Wiley they'd be hurt inside and not able to match up with people. But give credit to Bruce Pearl. I believe that was your National College Coach of the Year if we ended it right now and had to vote. But yeah, Kentucky is they're gonna be in. I think they'll be fine at home because it just always seems like they find a way to get it done in Rupp Arena. But those road games at A&M, at Auburn, at Arkansas, I would be very surprised if they come away with the win in any of those.
Yeah, and you know what? It's worth bringing up that, hey, they just went in to West Virginia and beat West Virginia, but that seems like a situation where, they caught lightning in a bottle in that second half against a team that struggles to kind of execute offensively whenever they slow down and start to, try and burn clock throughout games. So I'm with you, man. That's a tough schedule. I mean, in terms of Kentucky going forward too, what do you think the biggest problem is here? For me, it's just the flawed roster, right? This team has 4 players who play in their rotation: Kevin Knox, PJ Washington, Wenyen Gabriel, Sasha Kalea-Jones. All of those guys to me are 4 men. And Jared Vanderbilt as well, now that he's playing. They're all 4s. And whenever you have 5 4s in your rotation of 8 big men or 8 players, it's really hard, I think, to space the floor and play proper offensive basketball now.
Yeah. And I think that, I also think they don't have the point guard that can kind of erase and make up for, possessions that just kind of get out of whack. There's Quade Green probably isn't, I'm trying to be diplomatic about it. He's just not a typical Calipari point guard, speed-wise. Even Gilius Alexander, who I think is probably the best. They play their best when he's handling the ball the most. But he still kind of lacks that 5th gear that that certainly De'Aaron Fox had last year. So
Tyreek Evans, Derrick Rose, guys like that. Yeah.
Yeah, John Wall, all of those guys. So Kentucky, it's funny, at the beginning of the year, it was like these are positionless guys. They have attributes of different positions and they can play all of this. And as you just mentioned, it kind of seems like as the games have actually played out, what we thought would be expansive skill sets kind of have whittled down to, okay, they got a bunch of power forwards out there.
Yeah. No, I agree. And another issue too is if they could get more consistent decision-making and production from Hamidou Diallo, I think that they could more consistently play small. But when Diallo is struggling the way he's struggling in terms of his efficiency, in terms of his half-court offense, in terms of his shooting, and in terms of just what the hell is he doing on the floor half the time, if they could do that and they could get consistent minutes from him, they could play small. They could play lineups with Quade and Shea Alexander and Kevin Knox and him, and then play one big man and just kind of rotate that big man and play two bigs sometimes with Kevin Knox at the three. You can get some lineup versatility that way, but because they don't have a ton of wings, something that is going to be rectified next year whenever they get Keldon Johnson and Tyler Harrow in. But because they don't have a lot of wings on this roster, it's hard for them to really kind of utilize lineup diversity depending on who they play.
Yeah, and Diallo's the kind of the main guy you thought would make maybe have an advantage, having practiced last year and played against those guys in practice for a semester anyway. That he might have been a little bit more advanced, but we're seeing him kind of hit the freshman wall. The Missouri game, I mean, he just seemed out of sorts. Like, and overall, I think 5 out of the last 6 games, he's been a single-digit scorer, and it just seems like he doesn't know the right plays to make. It just seems like he's just out there searching. So, as you said, if he's on top of his game, that opens up a lot of options for Kentucky and for Calipari, but. Right now, I mean, he's just another freshman trying to figure it out. That's what it looks like.
And we go from freshmen now. I want to talk about Kansas, given the fact that the Kentucky-Kansas game, we thought early in the season, this was going to be an incredible matchup, right? This was going to be one of the two of the top, I guess, 10 teams in the country, certainly. And now it looks like Kansas is an incredibly flawed roster. Kentucky is an incredibly flawed roster. How much Kansas have you gotten to see, focusing in a little bit more on the Tobacco Road area?
Yeah, I haven't watched them a ton of times this year. I probably saw them more in the in non-conference play than I have once Big 12 has started. But I did get to see a bit of their Oklahoma loss, and I saw their win at West Virginia. So I've never been big on this Kansas team all year, because I felt like, especially early on, when it was like, well, is Preston going to play or is he not? When they still had DeSouza was out, it's just like all the moving parts. But I just didn't feel like, I felt like they had a bunch of kind of role players, and I didn't feel like there was anybody who's really going to be that Frank Mason role, if you will, on this team. As well as Devontae Graham has played, and this is taking nothing away from the season he's had. He's not that kind of guy that I feel like you can depend on like that to be, to take over games as a scorer. Right. I don't think that's who he is, and I think that's what this team needs.
And I think they were hoping that Malik Newman would be that guy, but he's certainly been better throughout the course of the later portion of the season. He's been up over 13 points in his last 5 games, had a couple of 20-point games within that little stretch. But at the same time, I don't know if you can trust Malik Newman going forward as that guy. I think that their biggest issue, though, comes on the defensive end. Udoka Azubuike has been way better than what I thought he would be. He is comfortable playing 30 minutes a night in a way that I am shocked that he is capable of doing, to be frank. But he's been awesome. He's been great. The problem is that, for me, they don't have enough depth behind him. And whenever you don't have a lot of depth at the big man position, it's going to be hard for you to protect the rim, especially when your perimeter defenders are as, let's say, not great as Kansas's are. Outside of Devontae Graham. Devontae, I think, is actually pretty good. Svi Mihailuk, not very good. Malik Newman is just small for the guys that he's forced to guard a lot of the time. LaGerald Vick gets lost off ball a decent amount. It's hard for them, I think, when Marcus Garrett isn't on the floor using his athleticism to kind of make plays on that end, to defend a wide variety of different wings and players of that sort.
Yeah, I probably have been most disappointed with LaGerald Vick because, again, I get back to he's got the tools to be a lockdown kind of defender, and it just seems like he hasn't developed into that yet. But Kansas, to me, is one of those teams where I think I'd still be kind of scared to play them. I don't want to see them on the other half of my bracket, but I also feel like It's kind of based on the tradition that they've had, not necessarily what we've seen, the reality of what this team has executed this year.
Yeah, I mean, they're still going to potentially win the Big 12, which is the best conference in the country this year. So I think that it's probably worth saying, like, hey, we're still thinking Kansas is going to be good. Like, they're much like Duke in the scenario where, okay, they're a top 10 team. They're probably going to be a second weekend team, but the standard for that program is so high that, I don't know that they're going to live up to the standard of that program.
Exactly.
The last couple of teams I want to talk about, a couple more ACC teams. North Carolina, I think we kind of knew this year that this was a bit of a down North Carolina team talent-wise. They obviously broke their 3-game losing streak yesterday against Pittsburgh, just blew out the Panthers, who were just dreadfully awful. There's not really another way to put that, but lose back-to-back games against Virginia Tech, North Carolina State, Clemson. I mean, I can't remember the last time a North Carolina team lost 3 games to programs like that. No disrespect to them, but this is North Carolina here, and 17-7 record, 6-5 in the league. Where do we stand with North Carolina? Do we think of them even as a second weekend team this year right now?
I think it depends on the matchup, to be honest. It seems like they were playing better earlier in the year, and for some reason, they just haven't come together. I think part of it is when Cam Johnson joined the lineup, I feel like Roy Williams always has been more of a traditionalist. He wants the 2 big post players.
Yep.
And he wants an inside out kind of offense. Well, they're basically starting a 4-guard lineup, and Luke May is he's playing the 5 for him, and it seems like they're just outside, like there's no post presence for this team, and I think that's a big adjustment. I think they're still just trying to figure out how to play, with basically 5 perimeter guys. That's why I think that their postseason is going to be based on what their 2 big men that are mainly in the rotation, Garrison Brooks and Sterling Manley, how fast they grow up the rest of the way, which you're starting to see Roy Williams play them together in the lineup a little bit more. I don't know if he's been doing that lately because, obviously they have Duke coming up on Thursday and he's going to want to match up size at some point with Bagley and Carter. Yep. But they look at it as they see it as he's trusting us more. I spoke with both of them last week. And so that's the way they look at it, like the way they're playing together and the playing time that they've had that's increased, that they're starting to get more trust built in. So that, to me, that might be what determines how far Carolina goes.
The craziest thing for me is that, as you mentioned, their best lineup right now is probably with Cam Johnson at the 4, Luke May at the 5. They're still 3rd nationally in offensive rebounding rate, which, Roy Williams' teams have always crashed the offensive glass super hard, trying to get extra possessions in any way they can. The fact that they've been able to maintain that level of offensive rebounding, even with the smaller players in there, I do kind of like that. Like, I think that the fact that they can still play a Roy Williams style offensively while also being able to, knock down shots from the perimeter whenever both Kenny Williams and Cameron Johnson are out there, it really helps them. What they're missing, I think, is just the ability to create plays. Joel Berry doesn't seem 100% right to me. Theo Pinson is good, but he's just a little bit limited. And Luke May is probably their best creator. And I can't ever imagine a circumstance where I would have said Luke May is the best offensive player on a North Carolina team. And I think Luke's been great this year, but that's just kind of the way it is, right?
That's exactly how it is. And it's funny. I think there are a lot of sentences we could put together that we didn't think Luke May would be the centerpiece of before the season started. But to speak to the rebounding, it's Theo Pinson has really come on strong in that area. He had 13 last night against Pittsburgh and had 15 in their loss to North Carolina State. And I think it's interesting. I don't know if this is going to happen, but one of the things I thought was interesting, Pinson is their best playmaker. He has the best court vision of anybody. And with Felton being suspended, in Seventh Woods. He might be able to go against Duke. He warmed up last night against Pittsburgh, but did not play. He hadn't played since late November with a foot injury. But I would be interested in seeing Pinson run point guard with Barry off the ball, just how that would work in a short time span, because Pinson just sees the court better. He's a better playmaker. Barry isn't that kind of a point guard. Barry is, to me, more of just a scoring, attacking kind of point guard. So I wonder, to your point, just about, playmaking and creating, I wonder how that would look.
That'd be an interesting construction, I think. The last team that we're going to talk about here is Louisville. Kind of a really weird up and down year for Louisville, it feels like, right? They obviously have the massive just blowout loss against Kentucky earlier in the year, and I think that a lot of people wrote them off after that loss. But you look up, they've beaten Florida State, they've beaten Virginia Tech, they had the decent win against Indiana, I guess. Whenever Indiana's playing well, I think that's actually a relatively solid team. But, they're sitting here at 16-7. I think they're pretty solidly in the NCAA tournament. Where do you stand on this Cardinals team under David Padgett, kind of thrust into the limelight under not the best circumstances?
Yeah, I feel like they turned the corner in the second half of their win against Florida State down in Tallahassee, because, they were fresh. The Kentucky game was still fresh on their minds, losing by 29. They had just lost at Clemson in overtime, and they were down double digits to Florida State. So it seemed like if the season was going to take a turn for a worse, it would have then. But I like the way that they came out and fought. And I feel like Dang Adele has kind of been the central character for them in terms of how they turned it around. And, at one point they're 5-1 in the ACC and looking pretty strong. Right now they've lost 3 out of their last 4. But, one of those was Virginia. Another was overtime at Miami. So certainly, and they were certainly in a position to win against Florida State at home. They lost 80-76. So if you look at it, their losses have all been close, minus the Virginia game at Virginia. But nobody is coming close to Virginia right now. I feel like they might be kind of that sleeper team that people still kind of have written off because they just haven't had these. They haven't had a clear-cut signature, win that just grabs your attention, which if they win at Duke coming up later in February, maybe that would be the one. Or if they get Virginia at home, maybe that would be the one. But I feel like people have kind of written them off because they haven't had that signature. But I do feel like they're right there in position to stay in the top tier of the league and to make noise in March.
They're sitting here at 6-4 in the ACC. They have Syracuse, Georgia Tech, and Pitt coming up. They should realistically be 9-4 heading down the stretch here against North Carolina, Duke, Virginia Tech, Virginia. That's not where we expected this team to be after the whole Rick Pitino mess went down. So I think that David Padgett actually deserves a pretty big kind of round of applause for what he's done so far, keeping this team together.
Oh, I definitely, I feel like, if it wasn't for what Bennett was doing, I would probably say Padgett, Kevin Keats. You could even throw Brad Brownell in there in terms of the ACC Coach of the Year argument. But given this was 3 days before practice, everything just, imploded in the program, and he still has them contending. So I think, definitely hats off to the job he's done for somebody who had never been a head coach before coming into that situation. But they always had talent. We knew they had talent, and if Pitino was coaching, we at the beginning of the year, I thought that they had kind of a Final Four potential on this team. Yeah. So, it's not like he's getting it done with smoke and mirrors, but it's just been a difficult circumstance, certainly.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you there. CL, do you want to preview a little bit what you got coming up this week?
Yes, we got a lot on Duke and Carolina with the Thursday showdown coming up. So Monday's ACC Notebook is going to focus on Notre Dame. And, you talk about a team we thought was, surely a lock for the NCAA earlier in the year is basically fighting for their life right now. So that'll be on
losses,
Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a profile on the Carolina big men, Garrison Brooks and Sterling Manley, as I mentioned early on. Just kind of looking at the progress and the process that they've had from start to now in terms of trying to be those big men that Roy Williams wants them to be in the lineup. And I might even have a surprise. I don't want to reveal it yet because I haven't got everything together on it. But right before the Carolina Duke game on Thursday, I might have a surprise coming that could be an interesting read.
Well, be sure to check out all of that and everything else on the Fieldhouse over at The Athletic. This has been the first episode of the Fieldhouse podcast. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. It really helps get the word out about the podcast. We'll be back at some point later this week with a couple of other really interesting stories that are going to be out on the Fieldhouse's website, as well as just some discussion about college basketball. So until next time, we'll talk soon. Bye.